Welcome to Timeless Chronicles, 15 bizarre mummification practices from around the world. Buddhist monks started mummifying themselves while they were still alive. Usually mummification starts after you die. For some Buddhist monks, however, the process began years before you actually passed away. Egyptians mummified a pregnant woman. Archaeologists with the Warsaw Mummy Project, who thought they were studying the remains of an ancient Egyptian male priest, were in for a surprise. Indigenous Peruvians left mummies in the fetal position. In November 2021, researchers from the National University of San Marcos in Peru announced they had discovered a fully preserved, pre-Incan young adult mummy in the fetal position, wrapped in ropes and with its hands covering its face. Australian and Melanesian mummies painted corpses in their own body fat. The indigenous people of the Torres Straits and neighboring islands had a particularly gruesome mummification process. First, the bodies were tattooed elaborately, often with stripes. All body fat was carefully removed from the corpses. Ancient Chileans mummified parrots and macaws, possibly because the birds were a sign of wealth. Parrots and macaws are not native to Chile's Atacama Desert, but archaeologists have found their feathers in the area, as well as mummified versions of the birds. In March 2021, a team of scientists who studied 27 remains of macaws and parrots at 5 Atacama archaeological sites suggested the birds were brought to the area from 1100 to 1450 CE via trade routes. The Chinchorro in northern Chile dismember, then rebuild their dead mummies in the Chinchorro style in northern Chile are about as far from Egyptian mummies as you can get. They also predate the Egyptian mummies by about 2,000 years. For these mummies, the body itself isn't so much preserved as rebuilt from the ground up by a master craftsman. The cold, arid climate created Incan mummies out of sacrificial victims. Incan mummies were said to be pretty stunning, complete with hair, clothing, and jewelry, and were paraded by their people through the streets. Tragically, European colonizers thought this treatment of the dead was irreverent, and so many mummies were destroyed. You can visit the mummified remains of many communist leaders, including Lenin and Mao. Not all mummies are ancient. For example, Russia has a modern mummy of Vladimir Lenin. This communist revolutionary was preserved over 90 years ago. Papua New Guineans keep mummies as part of the family. Have you ever smoked meat to dry and preserve it? Well, that's the basic concept behind the mummies of Papua New Guinea. The art of mummification is still practiced among the Anga people, and important leaders and officials are smoked in a hut for 30 days, like meat, before being put in chairs, paraded, and then perched atop a cliff to look down on and watch over the village. The Maori people mummified tattooed heads as trophies. Although whole bodies were not generally mummified by the Maori people, the heads of chiefs and great enemies were preserved as mokumokai, or trophies. The heads were ornately tattooed, the brains were removed, and then they were boiled or steamed. Finally, they were dried and preserved for display. A mummified little girl sleeps inside the catacombs in Sicily. In 1920, a heartbroken father asked that his young daughter, Rosalia, be entombed in the Capuchin catacombs of Sicily. Embalmer Alfredo Salafia agreed to preserve the little girl for all eternity, and just as he promised, she has remained intact for almost a century. Greenland's Inuit mummies included an infant buried alive. When a grave of 500-year-old mummies was unearthed in Greenland, it caused a stir, not only because of how well the bodies were preserved, but because of the identities of the dead. The Lady of Dai mummy still baffles scientists. This wealthy lady of the Western Han Daimbody St was entombed in 4 coffins to preserve her body, and surrounded in extravagance, including fine textiles and jewelry and even musical instruments. Such care was taken in preserving her that the scientists who unearthed her body were able to perform a full checkup, gynecological examination, and autopsy on her. Egyptians mummified more than just humans. We know that Egyptian pharaohs were mummified, but did you know that ancient Egyptians mummified animals as well? Dogs, goats, crocodiles, bulls, and even birds were mummified.